You were taught that you needed someone between you and the sacred, that there were layers of authority, hierarchies of purity, rooms of worthiness, that your voice wouldn't reach far enough, that your hands weren't clean enough, that your heart carried too many stains to touch the divine directly. You learned to bow, to ask permission, to whisper through intermediaries. But what if all of that was just fog? What if the distance between you and the sacred never existed, except in the narrative they built around you? What if the true gospel, the one whispered on mountains, etched in simple gestures, lived in bare feet on the earth, wasn't about distance, but about presence, not about ascension, but about recognition? You are about to remember something you should never have forgotten. Something that was said not by accident, but for convenience, for control, for fear of what would happen if you found out. There was a time when words were fresh, when the gospel was something you breathed, not something you memorized. It was movement, it was sharing, it was bread broken between callous hands. It was forgiveness offered before it was even asked for, before it was even asked for. There were no buildings, there were no special garments. There was no one saying you needed to pay, kneel in a certain way, or repeat phrases in languages you didn't understand. The gospel was simply, so simply, it fit in a single breath. Love, forgive, be free. But simplicity doesn't build empires. It doesn't maintain hierarchies. It doesn't justify marble palaces erected in the name of the one who had nowhere to lay his head. And then something happened. Slowly, like the rust that engulfs Iran, layers were added. Rules, rituals, requirements. The gospel was translated, rewritten, interpreted, shaped, not to make it clearer but to make it more useful. Useful to whom? To those who built thrones on the backs of those who sought only solace. You grew up hearing that the sacred was distant, that it was necessary to climb invisible ladders of morality, purity, sacrifice, that there were sins too great to be forgiven without the proper mediation, that your connection to the divine depended on external approval, on sacraments, on confessions, on obedience. And somewhere deep down, you felt that something was wrong, not in the words themselves, but in their weight, in the way they made you feel small, inadequate, always one step behind grace, always owing, always needing one more blessing, one more ritual, one more proof of faith. But the original gospel never asked for that. It never demanded temples. It never charged tithes as a gateway. It never said, you were too unworthy to look directly at the light. The original gospel was an invitation, not a chain. You're not discovering this now. You're remembering. There's something inside you that always knew. A stillness that ceases fiery sermons. A doubt that persists even after the ready-made answers. A whisper that says, this can't be all there is. It can't be this complicated. And you're right, because the true gospel, the one that was lived before it was written, before it was canonized, before it was transformed into a political and theological tool, was about one thing: the kingdom of God is within you, not in Rome, not in Rome, not in Jerusalem, not in any holy city or consecrated building, within you. That was said, recorded, preserved in words that survived millennia, and yet it was buried. Not by accident, by necessity, because if you knew that, Bill knew it deep in your soul, you wouldn't need anyone to guide you there. You wouldn't need permission to pray. You wouldn't need approval to forgive. You wouldn't need institutions to validate your connection to the divine. And that, for those who built power on the promise of being the only gatekeepers of heaven, was too dangerous. For centuries, the gospel was filtered. Councils gathered to decide which texts were sacred and which were heretical, which stories could be told and which should be burned, which interpretations were acceptable and which were blasphemy. And in each decision an invisible question echoed, does this strengthen us or weaken us? If the answer was weaken, the text disappeared. If the answer was strengthen, it became doctrine. It didn't matter if it was true. It mattered if it was useful. And so, the gospel of presence, of immanence, of inner light, was replaced by the gospel of obedience, of hierarchy, of managed guilt. You were taught that you were a sinner, not just flawed, not just human, but fundamentally corrupt, incapable of goodness without external intervention. That wasn't to free you, it was to chain you, because someone corrupt always needs a savior outside themselves, always needs someone to tell them they are clean, and needs to go back, kneel, ask again. But the original gospel said something else. It said, you are already loved. It said, you are already forgiven. It is said, what you seek is already here, pulsing within your chest, just waiting for you to recognize it. Close your eyes for a moment, just a moment. Feel the air coming in, feel the air going out. Notice how your body knows what to do without you needing to command it. Notice how your heart beats, how your blood circulates, how each cell works in silent harmony to keep you alive. You didn't learn this, you didn't deserve this. It simply is. Just as sunlight touches your skin without asking permission, without evaluating if you are worthy, the presence of the sacred is already in you, not as a reward. As Natir, the gospel that was hidden, was about this, about the grace that doesn't need to be earned because it was never taken away, about the love that is not conditional because it never began, about a kingdom that is not a distant place but a present perception, here, now, in the space between one breath and another, in the silence that exists before words, in the stillness that remains when all doctrines are forgotten. Churches fear this message. Not all, but those that build their existence on the promise of being indispensable. Because if you discover that you don't need permission to touch the sacred, the whole structure crumbles. If you discover that you can pray alone, forgive alone, love alone, without intermediaries, without obligatory rituals, without spiritual payments, what happens to those who were selling the key to heaven's door? They don't disappear peacefully. They react. They call you a heretic, a rebel, lost. They say you are being deceived by pride, by the arrogance of thinking you can find God without help. But it is not pride to recognize that you are a temple. It is not arrogance to realize that the light you seek outside has always shone within. It is only truth, the truth that they hid because they couldn't sell it. You were taught to be afraid, afraid to question, afraid to doubt, afraid to explore paths that were not marked on the approved maps. You were told that questioning was disrespect, that doubting was a weakness of faith, that exploring was risking perdition. But the original gospel was not afraid of questions. It didn't punish doubt. It didn't lock doors. It said knock, and the door will open. Seek, and you will find. Ask, and you will receive. There is no mention of needing to knock on the right door, of searching in the approved place, of asking through the official channel. Just knock, seek, ask. The door is your search. The place is your sincerity. The channel is your open heart. Nothing else is needed. Nothing else was asked. The rest was invented, added, imposed. To control, not to liberate. Breathe again, slowly. Observe how, at this moment, you are not separated from anything. The air that enters you was in the lungs of trees. The water in your body was once ocean cloud, someone else's tear. The atoms that form your cells were once stars. You are not an isolated creature trying to reach something distant. You are part of a vast, interconnected fabric, pulsating with life. The forgotten gospel spoke of this. It spoke of unity, of communion, not in the ritualistic sense, but in the literal sense, communion with everything, with every creature, with every breath of wind, with every grain of sand. The kingdom of God is not a hierarchy with you at the base, looking up. It is a web, and you are one of the luminous points where the threads meet. When you understand this, you realize that you have never been alone. You have never been disconnected. You never needed someone to reconnect you, because the connection was never broken, only forgotten. What does kingdom of God mean? Not a place after death, not a future reward, but a state of consciousness, a way of seeing, a way of being in the world where love is not effort, but a natural response, where forgiveness is not a moral obligation, but a recognition that you too have stumbled, you too have hurt, you too have hurt, you too have needed second chances. Where compassion is not a virtue to be cultivated, but the direct perception that the other's pain is some way your own pain reflected in another mirror. The original gospel taught this through stories, simple parables, the son who returned home and was received without judgment, the sheep that was lost and was sought without anger, the seed that falls to the ground and dies to be reborn. O Lot, they were not complex metaphors, they were mirrors, reflecting you back to yourself, saying, see how real love works, see how grace works, see how grace works, not as a transaction, but as nature, not as a reward but as origin. But that was complicated, layer upon layer of interpretation, until the simple stories became complex doctrines that required specialists to decipher, until the shared bread became an exclusive sacrament, until unconditional forgiveness became a conditional absolution, until the invitation became a requirement. And you, growing up in this, learned to distrust your own perception. You learned that your direct experiences with the sacred were less valid than the official interpretations. That your moments of clarity, of peace, of deep connection, needed to be validated by authorities who were never there, never felt what you felt, never saw what you saw. This was not an accident. It was by design, because direct experience cannot be controlled. It cannot be sold. It cannot be monopolized, but doctrine can. And so, your experience was devalued, while the interpretation of others was elevated to absolute. You don't have to accept this anymore. You don't have to pretend anymore that the distance they taught you is real, because it isn't. It never was. The gospel that overturns centuries of doctrines is not new. It is ancient, older than the councils, older than the creeds, older than the creeds, older than the institutions. It is the gospel that was lived before it was written, the gospel of presence, of immanence, of the divine, not as something above, but as something through you, through the laughing child, through the shared bread, through the shared bread, through the silence that heals, through the judge-stretched hand, through forgiveness offered without calculation. This gospel needs no temples, because it sees a temple in everybody. It needs no holy days, because it sees secret in every dawn. It needs no approved texts, because it sees revelation in every moment of genuine compassion. Close your eyes again. Take a deep breath. Feel your chest rise. Feel your chest fall. Now place your hand over your heart. Feel the pulse, the constant beat. This is sacred, not because someone blessed it, but because it is life. And life is the first miracle, the miracle from which all others derive. You are that miracle, walking, thinking, feeling, seeking. You don't need to be different. You don't need to be better. You don't need to be purified. You just need to be purified. You just need to recognize what already is. The forgotten gospel was not about transformation. It was about recognition, not about becoming holy, but about realizing that holiness is not what you do, but what you are. Beneath all the layers of fear, guilt, doubt, shame that have been deposited on you, there is a light, not metaphorical, real, the same light that exists in all life, the same presence that moves the stars and makes the flowers bloom. It is in you. It is you. For centuries you were told that you were broken, that you needed to be fixed, that you were born in sin and needed to be washed, redeemed, saved. But the original gospel never said you were broken. It said you were lost. And there is an immense difference. Lost means you forgot the way home, not that home doesn't exist, not that you are unworthy to return, ghost that you are unworthy to return, ghost that you forgot. Broken suggests that there is something wrong with you. Lost suggests that you have only distanced yourself from something that has always been there. And the way back is not through rituals, payments, or approvals. It's through remembrance, or approvals. It's through remembrance of looking inward and recognizing what never left there. The churches that fear this message don't fear you. They fear your freedom. They fear your freedom. They fear what happens when you realize that you don't need them to be whole, that you don't need them to be loved, that you don't need them to be loved, that you don't need them to be loved, the sacred. Because if you don't need them, what justifies their authority? What sustains their structure? What validates their control? You are no one's enemy for remembering this. You are not betraying the faith. You are returning to it, to the true faith. Not faith in doctrines, but faith in presence. Not faith in institutions, but faith in direct connection. Not the faith that depends on intermediaries, but the faith that recognizes that the veil between you and the sacred never existed, except in the stories they told to keep you bowed. The gospel that was hidden is not heresy. It is freedom. And freedom has always been the central message. Freedom from guilt, freedom from fear, freedom from fear, freedom from the need to prove your worth. You don't need to prove anything. You are a child of the light. You are part of the whole. You are, and always have been, exactly what the sacred desires you to be: alive, present, capable of loving, breathe, on the more. Feel the air entering through your nostrils, going down your throat, filling your lungs. Feel how each cell receives oxygen, how each part of your body works in harmony without you having to think about it. This harmony is grace. Grace not as a theological concept, but as a physical reality. Your body knows how to heal a cut, how to digest food, how to transform sunlight and water into energy. You didn't learn this in church. You didn't earn this through obedience. This was given, freely, without conditions, just like everything else. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. The sun rises for the good and the bad. Grace is not selective, grace is universal. And if grace is universal, then the rules that say who deserves it and who don't deserve are lies. Less useful for those who say access to what has always been free. The gospel that overthrows doctrines doesn't need elaborate arguments. It only needs one question. Do you feel, in the kite, when all external voices silence, that there is something in you that cannot be touched by any condemnation, something that remains whole, no matter how many times you've been told you were broken, something that shines. Even when you were taught you were darkness, if you feel that, you are touching the original gospel, not the edited version, not the approved version, but the lived version, the version that doesn't need permission to be true. Because truth is not something granted, truth is something recognized. And you are recognizing it now, not with the mind, with something deeper, with the part of you that always knew, but was taught to doubt. Churches are not enemies. Institutions are not pure evil. Many of them preserved important stories, kept communities united, offered comfort when there was nowhere else to find it. But preservation is not the same as ownership. Comfort is not the same as control. And when an institution begins to claim that only through it can you reach the sacred, it has stopped serving the gospel and started serving itself. This is not judgment, it's observation. And observation is not to destroy, but to clarify, to remind you that you always had a choice, to show you that there is a difference between religion and spirituality. Religion is the map, spirituality is the territory. You can use the map, but if you confuse the map with the territory, you will be lost in paper while life happens around you. Imagine you are in a forest, a vast ancient forest, full of trees so tall that their canopies touch and filter the light in golden rays. You are walking, your feet know the ground, your hands touch the rough bark of the trees. You hear the wind, you feel the coolness of the air. Someone approaches and hands you a book. This book describes the forest, they say. Read it, and you will understand where you are. You thank them. You open the book, and it is beautiful, full of poetic descriptions, detailed illustrations, carefully drawn maps. But as you read, you stop walking. You stop touching the trees. You stop hearing the wind. You sit down and read about the forest. And read, until you forget that you are inside it. Until you begin to believe that knowing the forest is knowing the book. And when someone passes by and says, "Feel the wind," you respond, "No, the book doesn't mention it that way." When someone says, "Touch the tree," you respond, "No, page 12 says the tree should be observed, not touched." You exchanged experience for description, and you thought you were being faithful. That is the danger, not of religion itself, but of religion that forgets that it is just the finger pointing at the moon. And when you only look at the finger, you never see the light. The gospel that was hidden is the invitation to look beyond the finger, to feel the light, to recognize that all the words, all the texts, all the teachings are just human attempts to describe what is ultimamente indescribable, useful, yes, necessary perhaps, but never definitive, never complete, never capable of fully capturing what you feel when you close your eyes and in deep silence realize that you are not alone, that something vast, loving, incomprehensibly present is with you, not judging, not measuring, with you, in you, as you. You were taught that you needed salvation. But salvation from what? From death. You cannot escape it. From pain. You cannot avoid it. From evil. You cannot completely eliminate your ability to err. So from what exactly do you need to be saved? The answer you were given was from yourself, from your corrupt nature, from your tendency to sin. But what if the question was wrong from the start? What if you didn't need salvation, but remembrance, not rescue, but return? The original gospel was not about escaping life. It was about living fully. It was about living fully. It was not about denying the body. It was about recognizing the body as a temple. It was not about fleeing the world. It was about bringing the awareness of the sacred into the world, kingdom of God on earth. Not aether, not aether, not in you. Close your eyes once more. Breathe. Feel the weight of your body, the pressure of your back against the chair, or your feet against the floor. Feel gravity holding you, gently, against the earth. You are being sustained, not by your own effort, but by invisible forces that constantly work to keep you here, present, alive. That is grace, grace as sustenance, grace as continuous presence. You don't need to deserve gravity. You don't need to earn the right to breathe. These things are given. And if these physical things, grace is freely given, why would love be any different? Why would connection to the sacred be conditional? It isn't, it never was. The conditions were added. For the same reasons there always have been control, power. The human need to create hierarchies where originally there was equality. The gospel that dismantles doctrines doesn't ask you to abandon your tradition. It doesn't ask you to burn books or leave communities. It only asks you to recognize the difference between form and essence, between ritual and reality, between description and experience. Rituals can be beautiful. Communities can be essential. Texts can be inspiring. But none of them are God. None of them are the sacred. They are expressions, attempts, approximations. And when you understand that, you free yourself to appreciate them without idolizing them, to use them without being enslaved by them, to find beauty in them without thinking they are the only door. There are many doors. There are many doors as there are people seeking. And they all lead to the same place, to the recognition that what you sought outside was always within, waiting, patient, shining softly beneath all the layers of forgetting. You are not alone on this journey. Millions before you questioned, doubted, searched beyond the ready-made answers. Many were silenced, others were marginalized, called heretics, rebels, lost souls, but they weren't lost. They weren't lost. They were finding the gospel that doesn't fit into doctrines, the gospel that cannot be contained in creeds, the gospel that is lived, not recited, felt, not memorized, experienced, not explained. And now you are part of that lineage, not out of rebellion, but out of sincerity. Not out of arrogance, but out of honest seeking. Not out of a desire to destroy, but out of a need to find truth that isn't afraid of your questions. Feel your heart beating again. Place both hands on your chest. Feel the rhythm, steady, faithful. Your heart doesn't stop beating while you sleep. It doesn't stop while you doubt. It doesn't stop while you question. It continues, because your life doesn't depend on your belief. Your life doesn't depend on your obedience. Your life is a gift given before you could do anything to deserve it, before you could follow any rule, before you could prove any worth. You were loved into existence, not loved after proving you deserve it, not loved because you followed the right path, but loved first, loved always, loved as you are. That is the gospel, not the edity deveration, not the veration that serves institutional purposes, but the veration that serves life, your life, here, now. Doctrines fall because they were fragile from the beginning, built not on experience, but on interpretation of interpretations, built not on unconditional love, but on love that demands payment, obedience, conformity, built not on trust in human goodness, but on fear of human evil, and fear generates control, control generates rules, rules generate hierarchies, hierarchies generate exclusion, exclusion generates suffering, and suffering becomes the very thing religion promises to save you from. A cycle that feeds on itself, but you can get out of it, not with anger, not with violent rejection, but with gentle recognition that there is another way, the way that was always there, beneath the layers, the way of presence, of compassion, of love that doesn't need to be earned, because it is already your nature. Take a deep breath, feel the air filling your lungs, feel the pause at the peak of the inhale, then feel the exhale, slow, complete, and in the pause after the exhale, before the next inhale, observe the silence, brief, profound, silence where nothing happens and everything is complete. That silence is where the gospel lives, not in the words, not in the sermons, not in the texts, but in the space between the words, in the silence that needs no explanation, in the silence that asks for no interpretation, in the silence that simply is, and in being, reveals you don't need to understand, you only need to be present, here, now, with what is, and in being, you discover that you never needed saving, you only needed presence, your own presence, fully here, fully now, fully alive. The gospel that dismantles centuries of doctrines is not aggressive, it is not militant, it does not seek confrontation, it simply shines, and where there is light, shadows disappear, not because the light attacks them, but because shadow is only the absence of light. When you ignite your own inner light, when you recognize that the kingdom is within you, the doctrines that depended on your darkness lose power, not because you destroy them, but because you transcend them. You no longer need them. And when someone no longer needs something, the thing that once seemed absolute reveals itself as relative, useful, perhaps, at a certain stage, but not eternal, not definitive, not true in the deepest sense. You don't need to convince anyone of this. You don't need to evangelize. You don't need to prove it. You just need to live. You just need to live. Live with the awareness that you are a temple, that you are light, that you are a unique expression of the sacred. And by living like this, you become a beacon, not by trying, not by effort, but simply by being. Light shines, not because it decides to shine, but because it is light. And when you recognize that you are light, you shine, naturally, inevitably, and others, walking in darkness, will see, and will wonder where this light comes from. And you won't need to explain with doctrines. You will just point inward, to the same place where you found it, and you will say simply, look here, not out there, not in me, but here, inside you. Look, and you will see what has always been there. Look, and you will remember what you forgot. Look, and you will return home. Doctrines might resist. They might fight. They can create elaborate arguments about why this message is dangerous. But doctrines are ghost words, and words cannot erase experience. When you feel, directly, the presence of the sacred within you, no argument can convince you that you are wrong, because you are not believing, you are knowing. And direct knowledge cannot be debated. It can be denied by others, yes, but it cannot be taken away from you. It is yours, permanently yours, and with it you are free, free to honor traditions without being enslaved by them, free to love communities without depending on them, free to respect teachings without idolizing them, free to be exactly what you always were, a unique, precious, irreplaceable expression of the sacred. You don't need to improve. You don't need to evolve to be acceptable. You already are. Here, now, complete. So, as you finish this reading, as you let these words enter into you, know this: you are not discovering something new. You are remembering something old, something your ancestors knew, something every child knows before being taught to forget, something the mystics of all traditions whispered, even when institutions tried to silence them. The gospel of presence, the gospel of presence, the gospel of inner light, the gospel that cannot be contained, controlled, or commercialized, because it is free, always has been free, and freedom is your inheritance, not promised for later, not conditional on behavior, but yours. Now, already, always. If this message found you, perhaps it's no coincidence. Perhaps it's the moment you were ready to remember, to awaken, to return. You don't need to understand completely. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to recognize what resonates. And what resonates is truth. Your truth, not imposed, not inherited, but recognized from the depths of your soul. And when you recognize, you can no longer pretend you haven't seen. You can no longer live as if separation were real. You can no longer accept doctrines that diminish you when you know, now, that you are infinite. Share this light, if you feel you should, not urgently, not with a need to convert, but with the naturalness of someone who has found something precious and wants others to find it too. If these words touched you, perhaps they will touch others. If these words touched you, perhaps they will touch others. If this recognition freed you, perhaps it will free others. Not because you are special, and truth recognizes truth. When someone really hears, they don't need to be convinced. They just remember, and in remembering, they return home to themselves, to the gospel that has always been there beneath the layers, waiting to be rediscovered. Let your light guide others, not by what you say, but by what you are, and be simply yourself, whole, present, free. That is the gospel, that is the return, that is the awakening, and it is happening now, in you, through you, as you.